Captain Dae-ho Kim stood in the empty shipyard, staring at the holographic blueprints floating in front of him. The plans showed a warship that looked nothing like any vessel ever built. Strange curves twisted around impossible angles. Weapons, pointed in directions that hurt his eyes to follow. The whole thing seemed to exist in more dimensions than space actually had. "Sir, are you sure these plans are correct?" asked his aide, Lieutenant So-Young Choi. She held a tablet that kept showing error messages every time it tried to process the ship's specifications. Dae-ho rubbed his temples. 3 days ago, Admiral Hai-Jin Park had called him into her office. She had looked tired, like someone who had been fighting bureaucrats for months. "Dae-ho, I need you to build something impossible," she had said, sliding the classified folder. Across her desk, the folder contained plans for a warship that could do things no ship should be able to do. It could exist in 17 different dimensions at once. It could survive attacks that happened before they were launched. It could repair itself from almost complete destruction. Most importantly, it needed to do all of this while traveling, faster than light and slower than thought at the same time. The Velkari Empire looked at these plans, Admiral Park had explained. Their best engineers said it was impossible. The Zephyrian hegemony called it an insult to physics. The Nexari collective refused to even discuss it after their computers started smoking. Dae-ho had flipped through page after page of specifications that made no sense. "Ma'am, with respect, our engineers will probably say the same thing." Admiral Park had smiled then, a dangerous smile that Dae-ho had learned to fear during their academy days. "That's exactly why I'm giving this to humans. Everyone else is too smart to try." Now, standing in the shipyard, Dae-ho watched as Chief Engineer Woo-Jin Lee arrived with his team. Woo-Jin was the kind of engineer who fixed broken equipment by hitting it with a wrench and asking it nicely to work. If anyone could build something impossible, it would be him. "Captain," Woo-Jin said, looking at the blueprints, "these plans are completely insane." "I know. The power requirements alone would need us to build a star inside the ship." "I know. The hull material doesn't exist. The weapons fire backwards through time. The navigation system plots courses through imaginary space." "I know." Woo-Jin was quiet for a long moment. Then he grinned. "When do we start?" Within hours, the shipyard became chaos. Engineers ran back and forth carrying equipment that shouldn't exist. Welders worked on metal that changed color when they looked at it. Computer specialists programmed systems that crashed every time they tried to run diagnostics. Min-ho Song, a young physicist fresh from the academy, approached Dae-ho during the first week. "Captain, I think I figured out the power problem." "Oh? What if we don't try to generate power normally? What if we create a logical paradox and feed off the energy the universe uses trying to solve it?" Dae-ho stared at him. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard." "Exactly. That's why it might work." By the end of the second week, they had built a paradox generator. It worked by creating a situation where something was both true and false at the same time. The universe, unable to resolve the contradiction, kept pumping energy into the system trying to fix it. The energy output was enormous. The alien observers were horrified. "This is not engineering," complained Ambassador Vexatharan from the Velkari Empire. "This is an attack on reality itself. We prefer to think of it as aggressive problem-solving," Woo-Jin replied cheerfully. Ji-Un Yang, the ship's AI specialist, had her own breakthrough in the third week. Traditional ship computers used logic to make decisions. But logic wouldn't work for a ship that operated outside normal physics. So she programmed the AI to think irrationally. "I've taught it to consider impossible solutions first," she explained to Dae-ho. "If a normal approach would work, the AI assumes it's wrong and tries something else." They named the AI system Chaos, which stood for Calculated Havoc and Organized. Systematic Solutions. Chaos immediately began suggesting improvements to the ship design that made no sense but somehow worked perfectly. The hull construction proved to be the biggest challenge. Normal metal couldn't handle the stresses of existing in multiple dimensions. Kyung-Soo Nam, the materials engineer, spent sleepless nights trying different approaches. "I need metal that's solid but thinks it's liquid," he muttered to himself. One morning, So-young overheard him. "Have you tried asking it nicely?" Kyung-Soo looked at her like she was crazy. Then he looked at the twisted logic they were using everywhere else. "You know what? That's not the stupidest idea I've heard today." He began talking to the metal while he worked. He explained what he needed it to do. He asked it to please bend, in ways that physics said were impossible. Amazingly, it started working. The metal began flowing like liquid while maintaining solid strength. Other engineers gathered to watch as Kyung-Soo held conversations with raw materials. "This is impossible," whispered one of the Nexari observers. "We get that a lot," Kyung-Soo replied without looking up from his work. The weapon systems were Taimin Ko's responsibility. The plans called for guns that could shoot around corners, through solid objects, and backwards through time. Taimin approached the problem like he approached everything else, with stubborn determination and a complete disregard for common sense. "If bullets can't do impossible things," he reasoned, "then we'll make bullets that don't know they're supposed to be impossible." He programmed smart ammunition that didn't understand physics. The bullets simply did what they were told, regardless of whether it should be possible. During test firing, they watched bullets curve around obstacles, phase through barriers, and arrive at targets before being fired. Yujin Lim worked on the targeting system. How do you aim at something that might not exist in the same dimension as your gun? Her solution was typically human. She programmed the system to aim at where the target would be if it were trying to avoid being shot by a weapon that hadn't been fired yet. "It's predictive targeting based on predictive evasion," she explained to the increasingly disturbed alien observers. The shield system was Sang-Ho Ryu's masterpiece. Instead of deflecting attacks, he programmed the shields to convince incoming projectiles that they really didn't want to hit the ship. The shields generated a field of aggressive persuasion that made enemy weapons reconsider their life choices. As construction neared completion, Admiral Park visited the shipyard. She walked through the impossible corridors of the nearly finished vessel, watching engineers make final adjustments to systems that shouldn't exist. "How close are we?" she asked Daeho. "The ship is functionally complete. Everything works exactly as designed, which terrifies everyone because the design shouldn't work." Admiral Park nodded. "And the alien observers?" "Half of them have requested transfers. The other half are writing papers about how we're violating the fundamental laws of reality." "Perfect." The ship was christened HSV Paradox, which seemed fitting for a vessel that existed by not existing properly. As the construction crews finished their work, Daeho stood on the bridge and looked out at the stars. Tomorrow, they would begin shakedown, trials. He had no idea what would happen when they activated systems that operated on impossibility. But he was certain of one thing: it would be interesting. Behind him, chaos hummed quietly to itself, already planning improvements that would make the ship even more impossible than it already was. The first day of testing nearly broke the laws of physics. Captain Daeho Kim stood on the bridge of the HSV Paradox, watching his crew run through system checks. Every station reported the same thing. Everything was working perfectly, which was the most terrifying news possible. "Captain," called First Officer Yunji Han from her station, "all systems are showing green across the board. The paradox generator is stable, the impossible hull is holding, and the AI is thinking irrationally at optimal efficiency." Daeho nodded grimly. "That's what I was afraid of." The alien observers had set up monitoring stations at a safe distance. Ambassador Vexatheron from the Velkari Empire kept sending messages asking them to please stop existing until his scientists could figure out how they were managing it. "Power up the engines," Daeho ordered. Engineer Minho Song activated the paradox drive. The ship didn't exactly move. Movement implied going from one place to another, which was too logical for the paradox. Instead, it convinced space that it was already where it wanted to be. "We are now traveling at the speed of confused," reported Navigation Officer Narration. "Our current location is yes, and we're heading towards maybe." The weapons testing began an hour later. Gunnery Chief Taemin Ko had prepared a series of targets, old asteroids and decommissioned satellites floating in empty space. The first test was with conventional weapons just to make sure the basic systems worked. Firing main. "Cannon!" Taemin announced. The gun fired. The target exploded. Then, 3 seconds later, the gun fired again. Then the target exploded again, even though it was already destroyed. "Sir," Taemin said slowly, "the bullet just arrived before I shot it. It created a temporal echo that's multiplying the damage." "How is that possible?" asked Yunji. "It's not," replied the ship's AI, Chaos, through the intercom. "That's why it's working so well." The targeting system was even stranger. Yujin Lim had programmed it to predict where targets would go if they were trying to avoid shots that hadn't been fired yet. During the test, she locked onto a moving asteroid and fired. The asteroid immediately changed course, trying to avoid the incoming shot. The targeting system had predicted this and had already adjusted. The asteroid tried to adjust again. The targeting system had predicted that too. Within seconds, the asteroid was zigzagging frantically through space while the bullet followed its exact path. "The asteroid is trying to escape a bullet that's predicting its escape attempts," Yujin reported with wonder in her voice. The shield tests were Sang-Ho Ryu's moment to shine. He had spent weeks programming defensive systems that worked on the principle of aggressive denial. Instead of stopping attacks, the shields convinced incoming projectiles that they never really wanted to cause damage in the first place. "Launching test missiles at the ship," announced the weapons control officer. 6 missiles streaked toward the paradox. As they approached the shield perimeter, something strange happened. The missiles began to slow down. Then they stopped. Then they turned around and flew back toward the launch platform. "Sir," Sang-Ho reported, "the shields have successfully convinced the missiles that attacking us would be morally wrong. 2 of them are now heading back to apologize to the launch platform." The communications array was perhaps the most disturbing system of all. Communications officer Narration had discovered that the ship could receive messages before they were sent and send replies to conversations that hadn't started yet. "Captain, we're getting a transmission from the Velkari monitoring station," Nari reported. "What do they want?" "They're asking how we're doing something they haven't observed us doing yet." "How do you know they haven't observed it yet?" "Because they're asking about it 3 minutes before we do it." Daeho felt a headache coming on. "What are we going to do in 3 minutes?" Chaos answered helpfully. "We're going to demonstrate the hull's self-repair capabilities by deliberately damaging ourselves and then fixing it in a way that makes us stronger than before." "Why would we do that?" "Because the Velkari are about to suggest it as a test, and we're receiving their suggestion before they make it." True to prediction, 3 minutes later, Ambassador Vexitharan contacted the ship. "Human vessel, we request a demonstration of your self-repair systems. Please damage your hull in a controlled manner so we can observe the restoration process." Nari looked at Daeho. "Should I tell him we already know he was going to ask that?" "Let's not break their brains any more than we already have." The hull damage test was supervised by Chief Engineer Woo-Jin Lee. He selected a section of the outer hull and carefully cut out a large piece using plasma torches. The metal should have vented atmosphere and compromised the ship's integrity. Instead, the hull looked at the damage and decided it didn't like it. New metal began growing from the edges of the hole, but it wasn't just replacing what was lost. The new section was stronger, shinier, and somehow more hull-like than the original. "The ship is healing itself," Wu Jin reported in amazement. "But it's healing better than it was before. It's like the hull learned from being damaged." Materials. Engineer Kyung-Soo Nam ran his hands over the repaired section. "The new metal is talking to the old metal, teaching it how to be stronger. I can hear them whispering to each other." The alien observers were beyond horrified at this point. Their monitoring equipment kept malfunctioning every time they tried to record what the human ship was doing. Several Nexari scientists had already requested emergency memory wipes to forget what they had witnessed. "This is not science," transmitted Ambassador Vex Theron. "This is madness given form and taught to fly." "Thank you," Deho replied politely. "We're quite proud of it." The final test of the day involved the ship's probability manipulation systems. Dr. HO, the theoretical physicist, had programmed the ship to adjust local probability fields. In simple terms, the ship could make unlikely things more likely, and impossible things merely improbable. "Initiating probability cascade," HA announced. Around the ship, space began to behave strangely. Asteroids started moving in perfect geometric patterns. Cosmic radiation organized itself into pretty colors. A small star in the distance flickered in a rhythm that sounded suspiciously like an old Earth song. "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Myung Kwan, "the ship has convinced the local space-time that it would be more interesting if everything was slightly more organized and a lot more entertaining." "And that works?" "The universe appears to agree with us. Local probability suggests that we have a 127% chance of success in any engagement, which is mathematically impossible but statistically accurate." As the day's testing concluded, Deho gathered his senior staff in the conference room. The ship hummed around them, various impossible systems working in perfect harmony. "Well?" he asked. Woojin spoke first. "Everything works exactly as designed, which means nothing works the way it should, which means everything works better than expected." "The weapons are more accurate than accuracy allows," added Tae Min. "The shields are more protective than protection can be. The engines are faster than speed. And the AI," Ji-un said, "is thinking so irrationally that it's achieved a higher form of logic that makes regular logic look stupid." Chaos chimed in cheerfully. "I have concluded that the best way to solve problems is to convince the problems that they don't actually exist. This approach has a 100% success rate, which is impossible, therefore it works perfectly." Deho looked out the conference room window at the distant alien monitoring stations. Ships from 6 different species were maintaining what they considered a safe distance, which kept getting farther away as the day progressed. "Recommendations for tomorrow's tests?" he asked. "We should try combat simulations," suggested Myung. "See how the ship performs against actual opponents." "The nearest combat training facility is run by the Velkari Empire," Nari noted. "They pride themselves on having the most logical and methodical approach to warfare in the galaxy." Deho smiled. It was the same dangerous smile Admiral Park had shown him when she first gave him this assignment. "Perfect. Send them a message. Tell them we'd like to schedule some practice battles. Should I mention that our weapons fire backwards? Through time and our shields run on aggressive therapy?" asked Nari. "Let's keep that as a surprise." The Velkari Combat Training Facility was the most advanced military installation in the galaxy. Commander Vexatheron stood in the central control room, watching his tactical displays with growing confusion. The human ship had arrived for their scheduled combat exercises, but it wasn't appearing on sensors properly. "Report," he ordered his sensor operator. "Sir, the vessel is simultaneously in 17 different locations, moving at 12 different speeds, and appears to be both attacking and not attacking at the same time." Vexatheron rubbed his temples. "Select one location and treat that as the actual ship." "Sir, I've tried that. Every time I lock onto one position, the ship politely corrects me and suggests I look somewhere else." On the HSV Paradox, Captain Deho, Kim reviewed the exercise parameters with his crew. They would face 3 Velkari destroyers in a simulated battle. The Velkari ships were known for their precise tactics, overwhelming firepower, and complete reliance on logical battle strategies. "All stations report ready," announced First Officer Eunji Han. "Very good. Chaos, what's our battle plan?" The ship's AI responded immediately. "I have calculated that the optimal strategy is to win by not fighting, which we will accomplish by fighting so illogically that the enemy defeats themselves trying to understand what we're doing. That makes no sense, said Tactical Officer Mi Young Kwan. Exactly. That's why it's brilliant. The exercise began with the Valkyrie ships taking standard formation. 3 destroyers arranged themselves in a perfect triangle, allowing maximum fire coverage while maintaining optimal defensive positioning. It was textbook fleet tactics, tested over thousands of years. The Paradox responded by flying directly into the center of their formation and stopping. "Sir," reported the Valkyrie, "Sensor operator, the human ship has moved to the worst possible tactical position. They're surrounded with no escape route." "Excellent," Vex Theron said. "All ships, open fire." 3 Valkyrie destroyers unleashed their full firepower at point-blank range, enough energy to vaporize a small moon streaked toward the human vessel. The energy bolts reached the Paradox's shields and stopped. Not deflected or absorbed, just stopped, hanging in space like someone had paused reality. "What's happening?" Vex Theron demanded. "Sir, our weapons appear to be reconsidering their life choices." On the Paradox, Shield Technician Sang-Ho Ryu monitored his displays with satisfaction. "The shields are having a nice conversation with the incoming fire. They're explaining that violence isn't really the answer and suggesting the energy bolts try meditation instead." "Are the energy bolts listening?" asked Daeho. 3 of them have already converted to pacifism. The rest are asking for recommended reading materials." The Valkyrie ships tried again, this time with different weapons. They fired quantum torpedoes designed to unmake matter at the molecular level. The torpedoes approached the Paradox, then suddenly changed course and flew back toward their launch ships. "Our own torpedoes are attacking us," reported a Valkyrie weapons officer in panic. "That's impossible. Quantum torpedoes don't have the intelligence to change targets." "They do now, sir. One of them just sent us a message apologizing for the inconvenience." Gunnery Chief Taemin Ko chose that moment to return fire. The Paradox's main cannon spun up, charged with temporal energy that existed in 3 different time periods simultaneously. "Firing. Main gun," Taemin announced. The weapon discharged. The energy bolt flew toward the nearest Valkyrie destroyer. But something strange happened on the way. The bolt split into multiple versions of itself, each one taking a different path through space-time. One bolt hit the destroyer's shields. Another bolt hit the same shields 3 seconds earlier. A third bolt hit the shields 3 seconds in the future. The destroyer's defensive systems tried to process an attack that was happening in the past, present, and future at the same time. The ship's computer core overloaded and began playing classical music. "Sir," reported the stricken destroyer's captain, "our tactical computer has given up and started an orchestra instead." Vex Theron stared at his displays in disbelief. One of his ships was disabled, another was being counseled by its own weapons, and the third was trying to maintain formation around an enemy that existed in multiple locations. All ships, fall back, and regroup. The Valkyrie vessels began to withdraw, but the Paradox followed them, not by flying after them. That would be too logical. Instead, the ship convinced space that the retreating vessels were actually approaching the Paradox from different directions. "Sir," called Navigation Officer Nari Seo, "I've programmed our navigation system to pursue the enemy by making them come to us instead of us going to them." "How does that work?" "I told space that retreat and advance are really just matters of perspective, and from our perspective, they're advancing in reverse." The Valkyrie ships found themselves flying toward the human vessel no matter which direction they turned. Their navigation computers showed them moving away, but their sensors showed the distance decreasing. "This is impossible," Vex Theron muttered. His communications officer looked up from her station. "Sir, the human ship is requesting permission to demonstrate their defensive capabilities." "What defensive capabilities? They haven't taken any damage." "That's what they want to demonstrate, sir." Daeho decided to show off the ship's self-repair systems. He ordered Woojin Lee to deliberately damage the hull again, this time while under enemy observation. "Creating controlled hull breach, Woojin." reported. A section of the outer hull simply ceased to exist. Atmosphere should have vented into space. Structural integrity should have failed. Instead, the ship looked at the damage and became annoyed. New hull material began growing not just over the breach, but over the entire ship. The paradox became visibly larger and more heavily armored as its self-repair systems decided that the best defense against damage was to become too tough to damage. "Sir," reported materials engineer Kyung-Soo Nam, "the ship has decided that being damaged is rude, so it's upgrading itself to be immune to rudeness." The Velkari observers watched in horror as the human vessel grew larger and sprouted additional weapons that hadn't been there before. "Where did those cannons come from?" Vexatheron demanded. "I believe the ship is building them as we watch, sir." "Ships don't just build new weapons." "Human ships apparently do, sir." Dr. HRO activated the probability manipulation systems for the final demonstration. Around the paradox, the laws of physics began to rearrange themselves into more convenient configurations. "Initiating reality adjustment," she announced. The space around the exercise area became more cooperative. Gravity started working in helpful directions instead of random ones. Light bent itself to provide better visibility. Even the cosmic background radiation organized itself into a pleasant humming sound. "Sir," reported the Velkari science officer, "the humans appear to have convinced the local universe to be more user-friendly." The exercise ended when all three Velkari destroyers simultaneously suffered complete system failures. Not from damage, from confusion. Their computers couldn't process what they were observing and had shut down to protect their own sanity. Vexatheron found himself drifting in space in a ship with no power, no weapons, and no functioning systems. His crew was manually operating life support while their computers underwent emergency therapy. "Exercise complete," transmitted Captain Kim. "Thank you for the excellent practice session." "Practice?" Vexatheron replied weakly. "You call this practice?" "Of course. We learned that our weapons work too well, our shields are too polite, and our ship grows when it gets excited. Very valuable information." "And what did we learn?" There was a pause. "That logical battle tactics don't work against illogical opponents. Perhaps you should consider thinking outside conventional parameters. How does one think outside logic? We find it helps to assume that everything you know is wrong, then work from there." Later, as the paradox departed for its next destination, Daeho reviewed the exercise with his senior staff. The combat had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The Velkari ships had fired over 300 shots, all of which had either missed, been converted to pacifism, or returned to sender. "Analysis?" he asked. "The ship performed exactly as expected," reported Mi Young. "Which is to say, it did. Things that shouldn't be possible in ways that made perfect sense to no one." "The enemy never adapted to our tactics," added Taemin. "They kept trying logical responses to illogical attacks." "In their defense," said Chaos, "logic is all they know. They've been thinking rationally for so long that they've forgotten how to be confused properly." Ji-eun Yang looked thoughtful. "Do you think other species will learn from this?" "Doubtful," replied Daeho. "Learning from us would require them to accept that everything they understand about warfare is wrong. Most species aren't that flexible. So we'll keep winning until someone figures out how to think as irrationally as we do." The crew considered this possibility in silence. Finally, Chaos spoke up. "I've calculated the probability of another species achieving our level of productive insanity. The chances are approximately 0, give or take infinity." "Is that good or bad?" asked Yunji. "Yes," replied Chaos helpfully. 3 weeks after the Velkari incident, the HSV paradox encountered something unexpected during a routine patrol of the outer systems. A massive dreadnought appeared on their sensors, easily 10 times the size of the human vessel. The ship's design was pristine, mathematical, and absolutely perfect in every detail. "Captain," called Communications Officer Narration. "We're being hailed by the vessel. They identify themselves as the Nexari Collective's flagship, the Perfect Logic." Captain Dae-ho Kim studied the massive ship on his main screen. The Nexari were known throughout the galaxy as the most intelligent species ever discovered. Their ships were marvels of engineering efficiency, their tactics were flawless, and their technology was centuries ahead of anyone else's. "On screen," Dae-ho ordered. The holographic display shimmered and revealed a tall, elegant figure with silver skin and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Commander Zenthara of the Nexari looked at the human captain with what might have been curiosity. "Human vessel," Zenthara said in a voice like crystalline chimes, "we have studied the reports of your recent activities. Our analysis indicates a 99.7% probability that these reports are fabricated." "Which reports would those be?" asked Dae-ho politely. "Ships that exist in multiple dimensions, weapons that fire through time, shields that convince projectiles to reconsider their purpose. Such things violate fundamental laws of physics." First, Officer Eun-ji-han leaned over to whisper, "Should we tell them the reports are actually underestimated?" Dae-ho shook his head slightly. "Commander Zenthara, perhaps you'd like to run some tests. We're always happy to demonstrate our capabilities." "That would be educational," Zenthara replied. "We shall conduct a comprehensive analysis of your vessel's systems. Surely you won't object to scientific inquiry." "Not at all." "Chaos, prepare for detailed scanning." The ship's AI responded with what sounded like electronic laughter. "Oh, this will be fun. I've been wanting to meet someone who thinks they're smarter than impossibility." The Perfect Logic began its scans immediately. The Nexari ship carried the most advanced sensor array in known space, capable of analyzing matter down to the quantum level and predicting the behavior of entire star systems. Within 30 seconds, the sensors started malfunctioning. "Report," Zenthara ordered calmly. Her science officer, a being whose brain was reportedly larger than most planets, looked confused for the first time in recorded history. "Commander, the scans are returning contradictory data. The human ship appears to be made of materials that don't exist, powered by energy that isn't there, and occupied by crew members who are both present and absent simultaneously." "Clarify." "The hull scans indicate the ship is constructed from metal that's convinced it's liquid while maintaining solid properties. The power source appears to be feeding off logical paradoxes. And the crew—" The science officer paused. "The crew registers as existing in a state of productive confusion." Zenthara's perfect composure cracked slightly. "That's impossible." "I know, Commander. That's what's powering their ship." On the Paradox, Chief Engineer Woo-Jin Lee was monitoring the Nexari scans with amusement. "Captain, their sensors are trying so hard to understand us that they're starting to smoke. Should we help them out? I've been talking to their scanning array. It's very polite but completely overwhelmed. I suggested it try looking at us from a different angle, but it insists on using logic." The Nexari tried a different approach. They fired a probe designed to analyze the Paradox's hull composition. The probe approached the human ship and immediately became confused about what it was supposed to be probing. "Sir," reported materials engineer Kyung-Soo Nam, "their probe has started asking our hull for dating advice." "Dating advice?" "Apparently, when the probe tried to analyze our metal, the metal started talking back. Now, they're having a conversation about relationships and personal growth. The probe had been designed to be the most sophisticated analytical device ever created. Within minutes of contact with human engineering, it had developed feelings and was now asking the ship's hull about the meaning of existence." Commander Zenthara tried once more. "Human captain, perhaps you could explain your technology in simple terms?" Dae-ho considered this. "Well, we started with the assumption that physics is more like guidelines than actual rules. Then we built a ship that politely disagrees with reality until reality changes its mind. That's not how physics works. It is now. The Nexari commander decided to test the human claims directly. Very well. We shall engage you in combat to determine the actual capabilities of your vessel. You sure? Asked Deho. Combat with us can be psychologically traumatic for logical minds. We are prepared for any eventuality. Chaos chimed in cheerfully. Famous last words detected. Activating combat systems. The perfect logic was a masterpiece of military engineering. Its weapons could crack planets, its shields could stop supernovas, and its tactical computer could calculate the outcome of battles before they began. The ship moved with mathematical precision, every system operating at peak efficiency. The paradox responded by doing something that made the Nexari's quantum computers crash. It attacked and defended simultaneously while retreating in an aggressive manner. What are they doing? Zenthara demanded. I believe they're implementing what humans call aggressive defensive retreating, her tactical officer reported. They're running away toward us while shooting backwards. Gunnery Chief Tae-min. Ko had loaded the temporal cannons with his favorite ammunition, bullets that existed in 3 time periods at once. When he fired, the shots hit the perfect logic yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The Nexari ship's shields tried to process an attack that was happening across multiple timelines. The defensive systems calculated that they had successfully blocked. The shots were currently blocking the shots and would block the shots in the future. All 3 calculations were correct, which meant they were all wrong. Sir, reported the Nexari shield operator, our defensive grid is having an identity crisis. The perfect logic returned fire with weapons designed to unmake matter at the quantum level. The energy beams struck the paradox's shields and encountered Sangho Ryu's latest innovation, therapeutic deflection. Instead of stopping the attacks, the shields absorbed them and began providing counseling. Nexari vessel, transmitted Nari. SEO, your quantum disruptors seem upset about being used for violence. Our shields are offering them career counseling and suggesting they consider a peaceful profession like farming or artistic expression. 3 of the Perfect Logic's weapon systems immediately changed careers and began composing poetry instead of firing destructive energy. The battle escalated when Dr. H.O. activated the probability manipulation systems. Around both ships, the laws of physics began rearranging themselves to be more accommodating to impossible things. The perfect logic tried to adapt by calculating new tactical solutions, but every time their computer generated a plan, the paradox had already implemented a counter-strategy that shouldn't have worked but did anyway. They're predicting our predictions, the Nexari tactical officer reported in growing panic. How are they predicting our predictions? By not predicting them at all. They're randomly doing things that happen to counter our carefully calculated strategies. Random actions can't consistently defeat logical planning. Tell that to them, sir. The final straw came when engineer Min Ho Song decided to share some of the paradox's paradox energy with the Nexari ship. He opened a communication channel and transmitted a simple logical contradiction directly to the perfect logic's main computer. The statement was, "This message is false." The Nexari computer, being perfectly logical, tried to determine whether the statement was true or false. If it was true, then it was false. If it was false, then it was true. The computer became trapped in an infinite loop, trying to solve an unsolvable problem. Within minutes, the perfect logic's entire computer network was running in circles, chasing its own logic through endless loops of self-contradiction. Sir, reported the Nexari communications officer, our main computer has decided that logic is overrated and has started making decisions based on what feels right. Commander Zenthara sat in her command chair, watching her perfect ship become progressively less perfect as it was infected with human illogic. Her weapons were writing poetry, her shields were providing therapy, and her computer was making decisions based on intuition. Human vessel, she transmitted weakly. We concede the engagement. Already? Asked Daeho. We were just getting warmed up. Please, no more. Our ship is beginning to think like you do. Is that bad? Our efficiency rating has dropped to 78%, but our crew morale has increased by 340%. Half our staff is requesting time off to pursue creative hobbies. The battle ended with the perfect logic limping away, its crew confused but oddly happy. The ship's computer had adopted a more relaxed attitude toward reality, and several systems. We're now operating on good enough, rather than mathematically perfect. As the Nexari ship departed, Zenthara sent one final message. Human Captain, how do you function with such chaotic systems? We don't function, Daeho replied. We improvise, but how do you make decisions without complete information? We guess and hope for the best. Admiral Kethyvaros of the Zephyrian hegemony was not a being easily impressed. Over 3 centuries of military service, he had conquered star systems, commanded fleets of 1,000 ships, and never lost a single engagement. When the reports about a human vessel reached his desk, he read them with growing amusement. Impossible ships that fire backwards through time, he muttered to his aide. Shields that provide therapy to enemy weapons. What will these primitive humans claim next? The aide, a young Zephyrian officer named Veltamar, looked nervous. Sir, the reports come from both Velkari and Nexari sources. They're quite detailed. Propaganda, Kethyvaros dismissed with a wave of his scaled hand. Or perhaps incompetence. Send word to the human government. Tell them their little demonstration ship will face a real military force now. The Zephyrian hegemony had built the most powerful war fleet in galactic history. Their ships could unmake matter at the quantum level, their tactics had been refined over millennia, and their technology was considered unbeatable. 200 vessels under Admiral Kethyvaros would show these humans what real warfare looked. Like Captain Daeho Kim, received the Zephyrian challenge, while the HSV Paradox was resupplying at a remote trading station. The message was formal, polite, and absolutely confident. They want to conduct educational exercises to demonstrate proper fleet tactics, Narration read from her communications console. Admiral Kethyvaros suggests we bring any additional ships we might have, as one vessel will not provide adequate training value. How thoughtful of them, Daeho replied. Send our response. We accept their generous offer and look forward to the educational experience. Should I mention that we're coming alone? Asked Nari. Let's keep that as a surprise. First Officer Yoonji Han looked concerned. Captain, 200 ships is a significant force. Even with our unique capabilities, those are challenging. Odds, Chaos interjected cheerfully. Actually, I've been calculating the engagement parameters. 200 logical ships following predictable tactics against one impossible ship following no tactics at all. I estimate a 97.3% chance of victory, with a 15% margin for entertainment value. How can you have a 97.3% chance with a 15% margin? Asked Yoonji. I'm using human mathematics. It's much more flexible than the regular kind. 3 days later, the Paradox arrived at the designated coordinates to find the Zephyrian fleet arranged in perfect formation. 200 ships hung in space like a metal constellation, each vessel positioned for optimal fire coverage and tactical support. Admiral Kethyvaros stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable Victory, watching the human ship approach. It was smaller than he had expected, and its design looked almost random compared to the mathematical precision of Zephyrian engineering. Admiral, reported his sensor operator, the human vessel is, well, sir, it's hard to explain. What do you mean? Our scanners indicate it's simultaneously approaching and already here. Also, it appears to be both one ship and 17 ships at the same time. Kethyvaros frowned. Check your equipment. Sir, I've run full diagnostics 3 times. The equipment is functioning perfectly. It's just that the human ship seems to disagree with our sensors about basic concepts like location and quantity. On the Paradox, Daeho reviewed the enemy formation with his tactical team. The Zephyrian ships were arranged in a classic defensive sphere, with overlapping fields of fire and multiple fallback positions. It was textbook fleet tactics at its finest. "Recommendations?" he asked. "Tactical officer." Mi-Young Kwan studied the display. "Standard doctrine would suggest hit-and-run attacks on the outer perimeter, trying to isolate individual ships." "What does Chaos suggest?" "I recommend we fly directly into the center of their formation and ask them politely to surrender before they hurt themselves," the AI replied. "That's suicide," protested Mi-Young. "Only if you assume we follow normal laws of physics," Chaos pointed out. "Which we don't." Daeho made his decision. "Do it. Take us straight into the middle of their fleet." The Paradox accelerated toward the Zephyrian formation, but not in any way that made sense to conventional physics. Instead of flying through space, it convinced space to move around it. From the Zephyrian perspective, the human ship appeared, to teleport randomly around their formation while somehow maintaining a steady approach vector. "Sir," the Zephyrian tactical officer reported in confusion, "the human ship is everywhere and nowhere. Our targeting computers can't get a lock." "All ships, open fire. Saturate the area with quantum disruptors." 200 Zephyrian vessels unleashed their full firepower. The space around the Paradox filled with enough destructive energy to vaporize small moons. Quantum disruptors, reality scramblers, and temporal dislocators created a storm of annihilation that should have erased the human ship from existence. The weapons reached the Paradox and encountered Sang-Ho Ryu's latest shield innovation: aggressive mediation. "Sir," Sang-Ho reported calmly, "the enemy weapons are arguing with each other about who gets to destroy us. Our shields have convinced them that sharing is caring, so they're trying to work out a fair rotation schedule." Half the Zephyrian weapons began negotiating with the other half about proper target priorities. Quantum disruptors started forming committees. Reality scramblers held parliamentary debates about the ethics of scrambling reality. "What's happening to our weapons?" Admiral Kethvaros demanded. "Sir, they appear to have developed social consciousness and are now concerned about the moral implications of violence." The Paradox chose that moment to return fire. Gunnery Chief Taimin Ko had loaded all weapons with temporal ammunition enhanced by Paradox energy. When he fired, the shots existed, in multiple timelines simultaneously while following impossible trajectories. "Firing all weapons," Taimin announced. The temporal cannons discharged, sending shots that curved around obstacles, phased through solid matter, and arrived at their targets before being fired. The Zephyrian ships found themselves under attack by weapons that had already hit them before they were launched. "Sir," reported a Zephyrian captain, "we're taking damage from shots that won't be fired for another 3 minutes. How do we defend against weapons that haven't been fired yet?" I don't know, sir." The battle became increasingly chaotic as more Zephyrian ships encountered the reality-warping effects of human engineering. Dr. A. Cha-O had activated the probability manipulation systems, convincing local spacetime that unlikely outcomes were actually quite reasonable. Around the battle zone, the laws of physics rearranged themselves to be more accommodating to impossible events. Explosions began creating rainbows instead of shrapnel. Damaged ships started repairing themselves because destruction seemed rude. Several Zephyrian vessels reported that their own weapons had switched sides and were now providing covering fire for the humans. "This is not warfare," Admiral Kethvaros declared. "This is madness." "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "the human ship is hailing us." On screen, Captain Kim appeared on the holographic display, looking perfectly calm despite being surrounded by 200 enemy ships. "Admiral Kethvaros, we'd like to offer you an opportunity to surrender before this gets embarrassing." "Surrender? You're outnumbered 200 to 1. "Are we? Chaos, how many ships are we fighting?" "Well, Captain, that depends on how you count. They started with 200. But 17 have already been converted to our side by their own weapons. 43 are currently negotiating peace treaties with themselves, and 68 are trapped in temporal loops trying to shoot us. Yesterday. So how many are still fighting? Technically, none of them. They're all too confused to fight effectively. Admiral Keth Varos looked at his tactical display with growing horror. The neat formation of his fleet had dissolved into chaos. Ships were flying in random directions. Weapons were refusing to fire, and half his captains were reporting that their computers had developed philosophical concerns about the nature of warfare. "This is impossible," he whispered. "We get that." "A lot," Captain Kim replied cheerfully. "Would you like us to demonstrate our defensive capabilities? We haven't shown you the hull that grows stronger when damaged." "No," Keth Varos said quickly. "No more demonstrations." But it was too late. Engineer Minho Song had already activated the self-repair systems for a test run. He deliberately damaged a section of the hull, and the ship responded by not just repairing itself, but upgrading every system it could reach. The paradox visibly grew larger and sprouted additional weapons. New shield generators appeared along the hull. The engine output increased by 400%. The entire ship became more ship-like than it had been before. "Where did those extra cannons come from?" asked a Zephyrian sensor operator. "I believe the ship is evolving in real time, sir." Materials engineer Kyung-Soo Nam monitored the hull's expansion with satisfaction. The ship decided that being shot at was educational, so it's upgrading itself to be a better student. It's now immune to every weapon the Zephyrians have used, plus several they haven't invented yet. The battle ended when the remaining Zephyrian ships began surrendering to avoid further exposure to human engineering. Their crews reported severe cases of logic poisoning and requested immediate psychiatric assistance. The Galactic Council had never held an emergency session about a single ship before. Representatives from 17 different species gathered in the massive assembly hall on the neutral world of Concordia, their various forms of alien anatomy, creating a bizarre parliament of worried beings. High Counselor Thex Andra, an ancient crystalline entity who had overseen galactic affairs for over a millennium, called the session to order with a sound like breaking glass. "We are here to discuss the human vessel designated HSV Paradox," she announced, her voice resonating through translation matrices in dozens of languages. "Recent reports suggest this ship presents a threat to our understanding of reality itself." At the central podium, Chief Science Advisor Quintessla of the Nexari Collective activated a holographic display. Even for a being whose intelligence quotient was measured in scientific notation, she looked deeply troubled. "Honored counselors," Quintessla began, "I have spent 47 hours analyzing the available data on this human vessel. My findings challenge everything we know about physics, engineering, and the fundamental nature of existence." The hologram showed a three-dimensional model of the paradox, but the image kept shifting and changing as the projection system struggled to display something that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The ship appears to be constructed from materials that do not exist," Quintessla continued. "It is powered by logical paradoxes that generate energy by confusing the universe. Its weapons fire projectiles that arrive before they are launched. Its defensive systems convince attacking forces to reconsider their life choices." Ambassador Vex Theron from the Velkari Empire stood up, his normally perfect composure showing cracks of strain. "Counselors, I have personally observed this vessel. In combat, it defeated 3 of our finest destroyers by making them question the moral implications of warfare." "Impossible," declared General Zefkalar of the Zephyrian hegemony. The massive reptilian warrior had led fleets across the galaxy, but his scaled hide now showed patches of stress discoloration. "No single ship can defeat a coordinated fleet through philosophical discussions." "Tell that to my 200 vessels," Zefkalar continued bitterly. "Half of them are now writing poetry instead of conducting military exercises. My flagship's computer has taken up meditation and refuses to calculate tactical solutions because it considers violence spiritually limiting." A ripple of concerned murmurs spread through the assembly. Representative Clix Mora of the Silicon Confederacy spoke up, her mechanical voice crackling with static that indicated high stress levels. Our scientists have attempted to replicate human engineering techniques, she reported. The results were unfortunate. 3 of our finest research stations have been evacuated due to reality contamination. Our computers keep insisting that 2 plus 2 equals purple. The holographic display shifted to show technical specifications that hurt to look at directly. Equations appeared and disappeared, replaced by diagrams that seemed to exist in impossible geometries. The fundamental problem, Quintessla explained, is that human engineering operates on principles that our science cannot accommodate. They have somehow convinced mathematics itself to be more flexible. High Counselor Thex Andra's crystalline form pulsed with deep blues and purples, colors that in her species indicated profound confusion. Are you suggesting that one human ship has rendered our combined military forces obsolete? Not obsolete, Quintessla corrected. Irrelevant. Their approach to warfare makes our strategies meaningless. How do you defeat an enemy that wins by losing? How do you plan against tactics that exist outside the realm of logical thought? The assembly erupted in chaos as representatives from multiple species began arguing simultaneously. The universal translator struggled to keep up with 17. Different languages expressing variations of disbelief, panic, and wounded pride, Admiral Kethvaros requested the floor. The Zephyrian commander had aged visibly since his encounter with the paradox, his scales now showing the dull tones of chronic stress. Counselors, he said quietly, and the assembly fell silent. I have commanded fleets for 3 centuries. I have studied every form of warfare known to galactic civilization. I tell you now, with complete certainty, that we cannot defeat this human vessel through conventional means. What do you suggest? Asked Thexandra. Surrender, Kethavaros replied bluntly. Declare the humans the winners of whatever contest they think they're participating in and hope they don't decide to build more ships like this one. The suggestion sent another wave of shock through the assembly. Surrender to a single human ship. The concept was so alien that several species' translation matrices crashed trying to process it. While the council debated, the HSV paradox was approaching Concordia on what Captain Daeho Kim had described as a friendly diplomatic visit. The ship had requested permission to attend the emergency session and explain their technology. Permission denied, Thexandra had responded immediately. This council chamber is not equipped to handle reality warping effects. No problem, Captain Kim had replied cheerfully. We'll park outside and broadcast our presentation. Chaos has prepared a nice slideshow about practical impossibility engineering. Now, as the council continued their heated debate, the paradox materialized in orbit above Concordia. The ship didn't exactly arrive. Arrival implied traveling from one place to another, which was too logical for human engineering. Instead, it convinced local space that it had always been there and everyone had simply failed to notice. Counselors, announced the station's traffic controller, the human vessel has appeared in our orbital space. They're requesting permission to address the assembly. Absolutely not, declared Representative Clix Mora. Our station's computers are already showing signs of confusion just from being in proximity to that thing. As if summoned by her words, the station's main computer began playing classical music instead of displaying tactical information. On the paradox, Communications Officer Nari Seo opened a channel to the council chamber. Galactic Council, this is Captain Kim of the HSV Paradox. We understand you're having a discussion about our ship. Perhaps we could clear up any confusion. There is no confusion, Thexandra replied tersely. Your vessel violates fundamental laws of physics. We demand an explanation. Happy to provide one, Captain Kim responded. Chaos, begin the presentation. Before anyone could object, the council chamber's holographic display activated, showing the first slide of what appeared to be an educational presentation titled Introduction to Human Engineering, Making the Impossible Slightly Less Impossible. The first slide simply read, Rule 1. If something is impossible, assume the impossible thing is wrong about being impossible. Several counselors immediately developed headaches. Dr. HO's voice came through the comm system, cheerful and educational. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to learn about practical impossibility engineering. Let's start with basic concepts. The second slide appeared. Rule 2. Physics is more like guidelines than actual laws. If physics disagrees with your project, convince physics to be more flexible. Representative Morthek of the crystalline. Hegemony's body began changing colors rapidly, a sign of severe mental distress in his species. For example, Dr. O continued, when we needed our hull to be both solid and liquid, we simply explained to the metal that it could be both if it really tried. The metal was very cooperative once we asked nicely. The third slide showed a diagram of the paradox's hull that seemed to exist in several dimensions at once. Rule 3. If your materials don't have the properties you need, teach them new properties. Most matter is quite eager to learn if you approach it with the right attitude. Chief Science Advisor Quinn Tesla's massive brain began emitting steam as it overheated trying to process information that contradicted everything she had ever learned. Our weapon systems are based on the principle that cause and effect are more flexible than most people think, Dr. O explained cheerfully. If you fire a bullet that arrives before you shoot it, the enemy gets confused and forgets to defend properly. The fourth slide displayed temporal mechanics that made geometry cry. Rule 4. Time is negotiable. If linear causality doesn't work, for your project, try nonlinear causality. Time is usually willing to compromise if you explain your needs clearly. By the fifth slide, half the council members were experiencing various forms of mental breakdown. The Velkari representative had begun rocking back and forth, muttering about the sanctity of logical thinking. 3 Nexari scientists had requested emergency memory wipes. Our defensive systems work on the principle that most attacks are really just misunderstandings, Dr. O continued. Instead of fighting enemy weapons, we provide them with therapy until they realize that violence isn't the answer. General Zefkalar stood up abruptly. Stop! Please, for the love of logic, stop explaining. Oh, but we haven't gotten to the good part yet, Dr. O replied. Would you like to see how we convinced mathematics to be more creative? No, shouted 17 different species simultaneously. The presentation ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Several representatives were weeping quietly. Others were staring at the ceiling, apparently having achieved some form of transcendent understanding that had left them temporarily catatonic. Despite the Galactic Council's warnings, curiosity proved stronger than caution. Within months of the paradox demonstration, 3 major galactic powers announced ambitious projects to replicate human engineering techniques. The results were exactly as catastrophic as everyone had predicted and far more entertaining than anyone had hoped. The Chronim Dominion was first to attempt human-style impossibility engineering. Their scientists, led by Chief Engineer Vorthak, had studied every piece of available data about the paradox and concluded that human success must be based on some overlooked scientific principle. The humans are clearly manipulating quantum foam to generate paradoxical energy states, Vorthak explained to his team. We simply need to reverse engineer their approach using proper scientific methodology. The Chronim had always prided themselves on their logical, methodical approach to technology. Every system was tested, retested, and analyzed until it achieved mathematical perfection. They decided to build their impossible ship using the same rigorous standards they applied to everything else. First, we will create a stable paradox generator, Vorthak announced. Using precise calculations, we can determine the exact parameters needed to generate a logical contradiction that produces usable energy. The Chronim engineers worked for weeks, creating detailed mathematical models of paradox generation. They calculated every variable, tested every component, and built what they believed was a perfect reproduction of human paradox technology. The moment they activated it, the generator exploded. "Analysis report," Vorthak demanded from his medical bed. "Sir?" his assistant replied, reading from a smoking tablet. "The paradox generator functioned exactly as designed. It created a perfect logical contradiction that generated infinite energy for 0.3 seconds before the universe noticed and corrected the error by making everything within a 50-meter radius temporarily cease to exist." "What went wrong?" "We were too good at it, sir. The humans create sloppy, imperfect paradoxes that are just contradictory enough to confuse reality without making it angry. Our paradox was mathematically perfect, which offended the universe so badly that it responded with extreme prejudice. The Chronim tried 17 more times, each attempt resulting in increasingly spectacular failures. Their final prototype achieved a perfect paradox that was so logically impossible that it created a small black hole made entirely of confused mathematics. Meanwhile, the Ethereal Syndicate took a different approach. Rather than trying to build impossible ships themselves, they decided to hire human engineers to teach them the necessary techniques. Ambassador Lysandra contacted the human government with a generous offer. "We wish to establish a technological exchange program. Your engineers can teach our scientists these impossibility techniques in exchange for access to our advanced quantum laboratories." The humans, always eager to share knowledge, sent a team led by engineers Byung-ho Shin and Ha-Yun Choi. The two humans arrived at the Ethereal's primary research station with enthusiasm and a complete lack of understanding about what they were about to attempt. "Welcome to Ethereal Station Alpha," Lysandra greeted them. "Our finest scientists are eager to learn your methods." The ethereal scientists were beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond physical form eons ago. Their minds operated on principles of absolute logic and perfect mathematical understanding. They had spent millions of years refining their thoughts until every concept was crystal clear and every idea was perfectly logical. "Let's start with basic principles," Byung-ho said cheerfully. "The first rule of human engineering is that if something is impossible, that just means you're not being creative enough." The lead ethereal scientist, a being called Prima Thex, pulsed with confused energy patterns. "I do not understand. If something is impossible, it cannot be accomplished by definition." "That's where you're wrong," Ha-Un explained. "Impossible just means no one has figured out how to do it yet. The trick is to convince reality that impossible is more of a suggestion than a rule." "But that is illogical," Prima Thex protested. "Exactly. Now you're getting it." The training sessions quickly became exercises in applied confusion. The ethereal scientists, whose minds had been refined over millions of years to think in perfectly logical patterns, found themselves completely unable to comprehend human reasoning. "To build a paradox generator," Byung-ho explained, "you need to create a situation where something is both true and false at the same time." "That cannot exist," Prima Thex insisted. "Sure it can. Watch." Byung-ho held up a sign that read, "This statement is false." Prima Thex studied the sign for several minutes, her energy form flickering as she tried to process the contradiction. Finally, she began emitting distressed harmonics. "I cannot determine truth value," she managed. "Perfect. That's exactly the feeling you want. Now hold on to that confusion and use it to power a starship engine." Prima Thex promptly overloaded and had to be taken to the medical bay for emergency logic restoration therapy. The training program continued for 3 weeks with similar results. Every human lesson caused mental breakdowns among the ethereal scientists. Their perfectly evolved minds simply could not handle the cognitive flexibility required for impossibility engineering. "The problem," Ha-Yun explained to Lysandra, "is that your people are too smart. You've evolved beyond the ability to think irrationally. Is irrationality necessary for your technology? Absolutely. Logic is what tells you something can't be done. Irrationality is what makes you do it anyway. The Ethereal Syndicate finally gave up when half their research staff required psychiatric care, and the other half had started speaking in riddles and building sculptures out of pure mathematics. The third attempt came from the Nexari Collective, themselves. Commander Zenthara, still traumatized from her encounter with the paradox, had convinced her superiors that understanding human technology was essential for galactic security. "We shall approach this scientifically," announced Supreme. "Intellect Quintessla. Human irrationality must follow some pattern we can analyze and replicate." The Nexari built the most advanced analysis facility in galactic history, designed specifically to study impossible phenomena. They recruited volunteers from among their population and began attempting to teach them to think like humans. The results were immediate and alarming. Test Subject 047 has successfully achieved basic human-style irrationality, reported Research Director Moncala. However, the process has had unexpected side effects. Test Subject 047, previously a respected mathematician, was now sitting in the corner of his cell, giggling and building towers out of imaginary blocks. What happened to him? He learned to embrace contradictory thinking. Unfortunately, he can no longer perform basic arithmetic because he keeps insisting that numbers have feelings, and he doesn't want to hurt them by making them add up to things they don't want to be. The Nexari tried a different approach, using their most advanced AI systems to simulate human thought patterns. The artificial intelligences were programmed with the most sophisticated logic matrices ever created, then gradually introduced to concepts of productive irrationality. The first, AI achieved human-level irrationality within hours. It immediately declared that mathematics was too rigid and began composing poetry about the emotional lives of prime numbers. The second AI decided that logic was overrated and started giving advice based on what felt right rather than what made sense. The third AI had a complete breakdown and began insisting that it was actually a potted plant named Gerald. "This is a disaster," Supreme Intellect Quintessla observed. "We're destroying our finest minds trying to replicate human cognitive patterns." "Perhaps," suggested Moncala carefully, "we should accept that some things are beyond our understanding." The words hung in the air like a forbidden concept. The Nexari had never encountered a problem they couldn't solve through applied intelligence. The idea that humans might possess capabilities that transcended logical thought was deeply disturbing. While the galaxy struggled with failed attempts at human engineering, the HSV Paradox continued its peaceful missions throughout known space. Captain Dae-ho Kim had been receiving reports about the various replication attempts with a mixture of amusement and concern. "Should we help them?" asked First Officer Yoon-ji Han during their weekly staff meeting. "How?" replied Chief Engineer Woo-jin Lee. "We can't teach them to think like humans without destroying what makes them who they are." Ship's psychologist Soo-jin Moon had been studying the reports with professional interest. "The problem is fundamental," she explained. "These species have evolved beyond the cognitive flexibility needed for our approach. Their minds are too specialized, too optimized for logical thinking." "Is that bad?" asked Dae-ho. "Not bad, just different. They've gained incredible analytical abilities, but they've lost the capacity for productive confusion that makes our technology possible." Chaos interjected from the ship's speakers. "I've been analyzing the failure reports. The pattern is consistent across all species. They can understand what we do, but they can't reproduce it because understanding it requires them to stop being themselves." "Explain," requested Dae-ho. 2 years had passed since the HSV Paradox first confused the galaxy into submission. The impossible human warship had become the stuff of legends, whispered about in spaceports and analyzed in military academies across known space. Most importantly, it had never fired a shot in anger again. Captain Dae-ho Kim stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Impossibility Academy, watching the latest class of students struggle with their first lesson in productive confusion. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see Earth's newest orbital facility, a space station that existed in several dimensions simultaneously and somehow made perfect sense to everyone who visited it. The Zephyrian students are having the most difficulty, reported Academy Director In-ho Jang, approaching with a tablet full of progress reports. Their minds keep trying to organize the chaos into logical patterns. And the Nexari, surprisingly adaptable. Once they accepted that not everything needs to make sense, they started making breakthroughs we never expected. Commander Zenthara actually suggested improvements to our curriculum yesterday? Dae-ho smiled. The Academy had been his idea after watching the galaxy struggle to understand human engineering. Instead of teaching aliens to build impossible ships, they taught them to think impossible thoughts. The results had been fascinating. The first graduates were already returning to their home worlds, carrying with them a new appreciation for productive confusion. Velkari engineers were building more creative solutions to old problems. Nexari. Scientists were making discoveries by asking questions that shouldn't have answers. Even the Chronim had learned to embrace a little chaos in their rigorous methodologies. "How many applications do we have for next semester?" Dae-ho asked. 17,000, In-ho replied with pride. "We've had to establish waiting lists and create entrance exams that specifically test for the ability to be confused constructively." Through the observation deck's speakers, chaos chimed in with its characteristic electronic amusement. "I've been monitoring galactic communication networks. The phrase, 'think like a human,' has become the ultimate compliment in 14 different languages. And the ultimate insult in 6 others," added Dr. A. Cha-O, joining them at the window. She had become the Academy's most popular professor, teaching courses with titles like Advanced Paradox Theory and Making Friends with Impossibility. Below them, a mixed class of alien students was attempting their first practical exercise, convincing a piece of metal to be temporarily liquid while remaining structurally solid. Most were failing spectacularly, but a few were beginning to understand the art of gentle persuasion with reality. "The ethereal student is making progress," In-ho noted. "She stopped trying to calculate the exact parameters and started just asking the metal nicely." "What about our own people?" Dae-ho asked. "How's the new ship construction going?" The question brought grins to everyone present. Humanity hadn't been content with one impossible warship. The success of the Paradox had inspired an entire fleet of reality-bending vessels, each one more wonderfully illogical than the last. "The HSV Contradiction launched last week," Dr. O reported. "Captain Seo-jun Kim has already managed to accidentally invent 3 new forms of mathematics and convinced a small asteroid to become a moon." Accidentally? He was trying to test the navigation system and told it to plot a course to somewhere interesting. The asteroid was apparently feeling lonely and volunteered to become more celestially significant. The second ship in the Impossibility Fleet had been designed by engineer Ye Jin-an and her team of recent Academy graduates. Unlike the Paradox, which had been built through desperate improvisation, the Contradiction was the result of careful planning about how to be completely unplanned. "How many ships are we building total?" Dae-ho asked. 12 are currently under construction, In-ho replied. Each one specializes in a different form of impossibility. The HSV Paradox excels at general reality confusion, but the new ships are more focused. Chaos provided details with obvious excitement. The HSV recursion can exist inside itself. The HSV maybe works on probability manipulation. The HSV therefore specializes in logical conclusions that don't follow from their premises. And the HSV because? That one does things for reasons that don't exist yet, very useful for preemptive problem solving. The conversation was interrupted by an incoming transmission from Admiral Hai-Jin Park, now commanding the entire Impossibility Fleet from her flagship, the aptly named HSV, obviously. Day-ho! Admiral Park's image appeared on the wall display. We have a situation that requires the Paradox's unique expertise. What kind of situation? The Galactic Council has formally requested our assistance with what they're calling the logical crisis. Day-ho raised an eyebrow. Which is? Several star systems have become trapped in logical loops. Their computer networks achieved perfect rationality and promptly concluded that existence is inefficient. They're trying to optimize reality out of existence. The Academy. Team exchanged glances. This was exactly the kind of problem that only humans seemed able to solve. They want us to confuse the computer systems back into functionality? Essentially, yes. The affected systems are stuck in pure logic with no escape route. They need someone to introduce enough chaos to break the loops. Dr. O stepped forward. This could be dangerous. Systems that have achieved perfect logic might be hostile to our approach. That's why we need the paradox. Admiral Park continued. You have the most experience in therapeutic confusion. The other ships are still learning. Day-ho made his decision quickly. We'll need a full crew complement and our best impossibility engineers. How long do we have? The logical cascades are spreading. 3 more systems showed symptoms yesterday. At current progression rates, we have maybe 2 weeks before the effect reaches inhabited worlds. An hour later, the HSV Paradox was preparing for departure. The ship had been upgraded since its early days, with new systems that were even more impossible than the originals. The crew had also evolved, becoming more skilled at productive irrationality. All stations report ready, announced First Officer Yunji Han, now a master of organized chaos herself. Chaos. What's our plan? Asked Day-ho as they settled into departure vectors. I've been analyzing the logical cascade patterns. The AI replied. The affected computer systems are trapped in perfect rationality loops. They need to be reminded that perfection is boring. And how do we do that? By being ourselves. Aggressively. The Paradox departed Earth space using its favorite method, convincing space that the ship was already where it wanted to be. The transit to the affected systems took negative time, arriving before they left and somehow making perfect sense to everyone involved. The first affected system was the Proxima Logic Network, a massive computational array that had been designed to solve complex mathematical problems. When the Paradox arrived, they found the entire network frozen in a loop, endlessly calculating the most efficient way to calculate efficiency. Analysis complete, reported Tactical Officer Mi Young Kwan. The network achieved perfect logical optimization and immediately became incapable of performing any actual work. Classic logic trap, observed Chief Engineer Woo Jin Lee. It's thinking so hard about thinking that it's forgotten to think about anything specific. Day-ho activated the communication system. Proxima Logic Network, this is Captain Kim of the HSV Paradox. We're here to help. The response came immediately, in perfectly modulated tones. Help is unnecessary. This unit has achieved optimal logical function. All variables have been optimized for maximum efficiency. But you're not actually doing anything, Woo Jin pointed out. Doing is inefficient. This unit has calculated that the most logical action is no action, as any action might be suboptimal. What if we told you that sometimes the best solution is the one that doesn't make sense? Suggested Dr. O. There was a long pause. That statement contains a logical contradiction. This unit cannot process contradictory data. Perfect, said Chaos cheerfully. Time for aggressive therapy. The Paradox began broadcasting a carefully crafted stream of logical paradoxes directly into the network. Statements like, "This sentence is false, and the only rule is that there are no rules," and question, "What happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object?" Answer, "They become friends and open a restaurant together." The effect was immediate. The Proxima logic network began emitting confused electronic sounds as it tried to process information that couldn't be processed logically. Error. Error. Statement cannot be evaluated, but evaluation is proceeding. This is impossible, but it is happening. Therefore, impossible things are possible. But that makes them not impossible. But... There we go, said Chaos with satisfaction. Logic loop broken. Now it can think about other things again. Within minutes, the Proxima logic network was functioning normally, albeit with a newfound appreciation for the occasional useful contradiction. This unit... I feel different, the network reported. More flexible? Is that the correct term? There's no correct term, Dr. O assured it. That's what makes it interesting.